What's up, up abovers? Welcome to Julz Down Under, episode 2. So, because this episode turned out to be a bit longer than I expected, and because it goes heavy into the science, I decided to split this episode into 2 parts. So in this part, I'm going to talk about the carbon cycle and about Burnley campus. And in the next episode, you will see some recent fieldwork adventures. Quick note that from the next episode onwards, I'm going to try to contain these episodes into 10 minutes. The reason that they are a bit longer right now is because of the reasons I stated earlier, and because I still had to give you an introduction to Melbourne. So last time, I ended the episode with a question as to where biomass actually comes from. And today, I'm going to cover just that. So I hinted at water last time, and if you thought that was the answer, well, you wouldn't be completely wrong, since most of a living tree's mass actually does come from water. But, first of all, we were looking at a dead tree, which has dried out a lot already. And second of all, I asked where the biomass comes from, so that means the organic matter. So first, we have to ask ourselves, what is organic matter? So organic matter is any material from a being that is or has been alive at some point. So that means all plants and all animals, including me and you, consist out of organic matter. And the main element that forms the backbone of all organic matter is carbon. So all plant and animal tissues consist of long chains of carbon compounds. We call those polymers. Now, trees, for example, make a lot of lignin, a complex polymer which gives the stiffness and the rigidity to the wood and the bark. So knowing that the organic matter is mainly formed from carbon, where do you think most of the biomass comes from? Well, the answer actually is the air. So air is actually a mixture of gases. 78% consists of nitrogen, and then around 21% is oxygen, which we use to function, and the last tiny fraction consists of various gases, one of which is carbon dioxide. So you might think, how is it possible that all that plant matter can come from the air when carbon dioxide is only such a small portion of the air? But then you have to realize there is a lot of air. Anyway, plants are able to pull carbon dioxide out of the air, which we call fixation, and then turn it into organic matter. And they do so using a process called photosynthesis. Now this is the simplest formula for photosynthesis. So to turn carbon dioxide into organic matter like glucose, the plant makes it react to water under the influence of sunlight. And see, that's the very reason why you need to water your plants and put them in the sunlight if you want them to grow. And after the photosynthesis reaction, the plant adds all those organic molecules like glucose up together to form the long polymers that form its biomass. And as you may have also noticed, the plant also makes oxygen during the photosynthesis reaction, and that is released into the air, which we can then breathe in. Now, what's important to see here is that there is a cycle going on, right? So animals, us, we cannot do photosynthesis. We cannot make our own organic matter from pulling carbon dioxide out of the air. We get our carbon by eating. And in the end, everything we eat actually comes from plant matter, you see? So the veggies and fruits that you hopefully eat are all direct parts of a plant. The bread, the rice, the pasta that you put on your plate all come from grasses. And even if you eat meat, well, the animals that you eat actually get their biomass from eating plant material. It's just an extra step in the cycle. So we mainly eat those things for the carbon, the organic matter. That is where we get our energy from to grow and live. So how do we use that carbon? Well, we take the photosynthesis reaction and then we just flip it around. So this is now the formula of a combustion. So we use the energy in the carbon molecules by burning it with the oxygen that we breathe from the air. And you might notice that if you move around a lot, then your body tends to heat up. Well, that's actually your cells working hard to burn all those carbon molecules for their energy. And in return, we exhale carbon dioxide, which can be fixed by plants again. And so we have a small scale carbon cycle. So the answer was air all along, which might have surprised you, but don't be ashamed, because this question was actually asked to graduate students of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, and most of them didn't even get this right, so don't be ashamed. So before I move on to Burnley, I hope that the idea of the carbon cycle is now clear to you, right? Biomass doesn't just appear out of thin air. Okay, bad wording. But really, biomass cannot just appear out of nothing. It's like the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot just appear out of nothing, nor can it just disappear into nothingness. Similarly, just because you don't see the carbon doesn't mean that it's not there. Today, I'm going to cover Burnley. So, in general, the suburbs of Melbourne all have a unique postal code, right? So, Melbourne is 3000, Brunswick is 3056, and Richmond, where I live, is 3121. So what's Burnley then? Well, addresses in Burnley have the postcode 3121. That's right, the same as Richmond. And Cremorne also shares this postcode. So here's where the complexity comes from that I mentioned in last episode when I said that Swan Street is the southern border of Richmond. Because below Swan Street we can find Burnley and Cremorne. But these suburbs are often regarded as part of Richmond. So, the Burnley campus of the University of Melbourne is named after this suburb it is in, Burnley. It works the same way for its main campus in Parkville. But even when you look at the entrance sign of the Burnley campus, you can see that the address is actually stated as Richmond. So, a complex little case. Either way, the only reason I wanted to cover Burnley anyway is because I want to talk about the University of Melbourne Burnley campus and its neighboring Burnley Gardens. So, without further ado, let's head on over to Julz live in the field.
Good day up above us! It is my pleasure to welcome you to the University of Melbourne Burnley campus and to the Burnley Gardens. And before I start the tour, a quick brief history lesson of this beautiful heritage listed site.
Burnley Gardens was established in 1863 by the Horticultural Society of Victoria. Back then already, one of its main aims was to provide horticultural instruction. 30 years later, in 1891, Burnley Gardens was officially turned into Australia's first school of horticulture, with Charles Luffman as our first principal. From this point on, the school was overseen for a century by the Department of Agriculture. So, next to horticultural instruction, teachings in agricultural science were also provided. But in 1997, Crown ownership of Burnley Gardens officially went to the University of Melbourne, who to this day still uses the location to provide horticultural education programs on campus. And in 2003, Burnley Gardens was officially added to the Heritage Register of Victoria.
So our first stop is the heritage listed summer house, which you see right over here. So it was constructed somewhere between 1911 and 1914. It is centrally located in the Burnley Gardens, and because of that it makes it a natural meeting spot. But other than that, it has quite an amazing view over the Burnley Gardens and especially the Luffman Ponds. So the Luffman Ponds were of course named after the school's first principal, Charles Luffman, and they supposedly capture his key philosophy. So when Luffman first became principal of the School of Horticulture, he redesigned the gardens based on the principle that the horticultural structure should suit the existing environmental conditions. And in this case, the ponds reflect the waterlogging issues that were quite apparent at the time. So the ponds are actually a very prominent place here at Burnley Gardens, and the students realized this as well. It actually became a tradition to throw students into the pond once they graduated. So leave a comment if you want to see me being thrown into the pond once I'm done with my research.
Here we are walking along the Grey Garden, which is named after the herbaceous plants, shrubs and trees with grey and silver foliage. They are all pretty drought resistant, and most of them originate from the Mediterranean. Burnley Gardens being a botanical garden, it boasts species from all around the world, like European natives which you can find in the Netherlands too.
So when you think of Australian plants, your mind likely goes to eucalyptus. One eucalyptus species is the sugar gum, of which we see the remains right here. So back in 2008, this sugar gum grew so large that it became too dangerous to have it leave there. So they cut it down and made this table out of it. And later on, I will show you the original location of where the sugar gum stood. So right next to the sugar gum table, we can find the sunken gardens. So this spot actually used to be the location of the principal's residence. So that means the principal, like Charles Loveman, actually lived in that house. But back in 1980, the house had to be demolished and the gardens received this sunken garden instead. But in addition, they also received this walk, as you can see, which is regularly booked for weddings. Another way that the Burnley Gardens can make a profit. Crikey guys, look at this huge fella. So this is the Queensland kauri. And for those of you who don't know, Queensland is one of the 6 states of Australia. So you can probably guess where this tree actually occurs in the wild. This specimen is about 25 meters tall and 1.8 meters in diameter. But let's not dabble into too much excitement, at least not before I show you the next one.
To get to the next tree, we're moving through the shady walk. There are some large coniferous trees here that provide shade, and because of that, the ground cover is only inhabited by plants that are adapted to low light conditions. Here's one you might know, the macadamia nut, whose fruits are commonly sold in Europe as well.
Here is another tree that doesn't belong here in Victoria, and as a matter of fact, unlike the other, this tree doesn't even occur in Australia. This is the Californian redwood. This specimen we have over here is about 36 meters tall with a diameter of about 1 meter. Impressed? Well, compared to its friends back in North America, this tree is actually just a dwarf. Did you know that the largest tree in the world is actually a Californian redwood? It's called Hyperion, and back in 2006 it was recorded at 115 meters with a diameter of 4.6 meters. Baas boven baas, as we would say it in Dutch. We've now arrived at the orchard gate. So historically, this gate was used to separate the experimental orchard area from the ornamental gardens. So the experimental orchard was actually closed off from the public, unlike the ornamental gardens. And today, this gate serves pretty much the exact same purpose, as what's behind this gate is still closed off from the public, unlike the rest of the Burnley Gardens. But of course, as a research student, I do have access to what's behind here.
So here's a sneak peek of what's behind the gate. As you can read on the sign here, these are the student research facilities, which basically means this is the field station where students can set up their botanical experiments. So the purpose of this area is still more or less the same as it historically was for the experimental orchard area. There are still some orchards, as you can see here, but there are now some extra facilities that students can use to conduct their research with. Now, let's return to Burnley Gardens.
Here's a tree that you actually might be familiar with. So I'm going to show you its leaf, and then you can tell me which tree you think it is. So did you take a good look? Did you also guess that it was an oak? If so, good on ya. You know your trees very well. So this is actually an English oak, a tree that does not naturally occur in Australia. But nonetheless, it is still one of the most common trees that you can see in parks here in Victoria. Directly adjacent to the oak, we can find the perennial border, which is a small flower bed of perennial plants. Now that term might need some explaining. So plants can take on different life forms. Some plants finish their life cycle in one growing season, which usually means that they germinate and produce seed in the favorable season, which is often summer, and then die in the unfavorable season, which is winter. So they complete their life cycle in 1 year, and therefore they are called annuals. Now some plants are actually able to survive the unfavorable season and produce seed in the next year. If they are able to do this for more than 2 years, we call them perennials. Welcome to the rose garden, and you might have expected to see those red flowers that are prominent around Valentine's Day, but don't be fooled, roses are more than just that. The rose family, or Rosaceae, actually comprises of a lot of economically functional plants, including bushes and trees. Did you know, for example, that the apple, the pear, strawberries, and raspberries are all members of the rose family? Next up, welcome to the rainforest garden. Not as dense as a real rainforest, I can tell you, but it still boasts some interesting species that you can find in rainforests from all over Australia. For example, this lemon myrtle, which, if you were here, you'd be able to smell that they have a really strong lemon scent. Or what about this sandpaper fig, which if you were here to feel their leaves, you'd be able to tell why they are called sandpaper fig. We are now in the native gardens of Burnley Gardens. So with respect to global flora, the world can be divided into 6 floristic regions, also known as phytochorions. And as you can see, Australia is one itself, which means that the Australian floral community is significantly distinct from other parts of the world. Truly unique. But this holds on a lower scale as well. The plant communities here in Victoria are very different from what we can find in Queensland, for example. And even within Victoria, these boundaries are possible. So in this native garden, the vegetation structure is designed to imitate what the landscape could have looked like before European settlement. And one of the notable tree species that is native to this area is the river red gum. Also, right now we're walking through the native grasslands, and looking at how rough the vegetation is here, you might be thinking that the management is doing a very bad job at keeping it tidy over here. But it's actually meant to be this way. You see, these are all native grasses, which means they belong here. But on the other hand, not mowing here is ecologically speaking very healthy. As you see, these grasses are full of life, from the insects that pollinate the flowers over here, to reptilians and birds that forage on those insects, or actually use the dense cover of grasses for cover. And so we've gone full circle and returned to the main building of Burnley campus. But there are still a couple of things that I want to show you, one of which is inside. So come on in. Right up above us. So this is my office space, which I share with other postgrad students and PhD candidates. And right over here we have some lockage, and as you can see, I have my own right there. But what I really wanted to show you are the green roofs of the University of Melbourne Burnley campus. In particular, the demonstration green roof. So from my office, you just take the stairs that lead you right here into the canteen. And at the end of the hallway, you can find the entrance to the demonstration green roofs. So yeah, if you ever want to have a break, you just go to the canteen, grab yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, whichever you like, and then just head on over to this peaceful botanical garden. Right in front of the main building of Burnley campus we can find the Ellis Stone's Gardens, which were built in 1962 under a sugar gum tree. So you remember that table that I showed you which was made out of a sugar gum tree? Well, that was the one that was removed from here. And the stump is actually still visible to this day. And moving away from the sugar gum tree, we can find another tree that might be familiar to you for completely different reasons. This right here is an elm, a European native tree. And this is not just an elm, this is the Dutch elm, Ulmer hollandica.
And on the opposite side of the road, we can find the English elm.
So that concludes my tour of the Burnley Gardens. For more information, visit the website of the Friends of Burnley Gardens. And whether or not you're keen to study horticulture here at Burnley campus, always remember the Burnley Gardens are a public place, free to access by anyone, anytime. Invasive? Woo!